Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at what is the affective fallacy. Now, the affective fallacy is a debated or disputed fallacy in the field of aesthetics and art criticism. What that means is, unlike many of the other fallacies we cover here, it is something that some people argue is a fallacy, while others think it's not actually a fallacy. Simply stated, it claims that a work of art should not be judged based on the emotional impact that work has on a particular audience or on a critic. According to the proponents of this fallacy, if you judge a work of art based on the impact it has on the audience or on yourself, you are committing this fallacy. In some ways, this is the opposite of the paradox of intentionality, also called the fallacy of intentionality, which raises questions of whether the intent of an author determines the meaning of a work. The fallacy of intentionality argues that the meaning of a work isn't determined by what the author intended by it, and the affective fallacy raises questions as to whether the impact that a work has on an audience determines the true merit of that work of art. So these are kind of trying to approach a problem from two different directions and isolate the value, meaning, and merit of art to the inherent characteristics of that art, not either the intention of the artist or the impact that it has on the audience. So, the affective fallacy was part of an argument put forward by the New Critics and is closely associated with the works of W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. They argued that the value of a work of art, specifically poetry, though the concept is often generalized to all arts, should be judged based on its internal merits. They made the case that the affective fallacy confuses a piece of art with what it does. That is, the art should be judged based on what it is, namely a piece of art, instead of what it does, i.e. elicit emotions in people. Now, there are several reasons that they give for this position. They argue that the judgment of critics should be objective and comparable, that there is a right or wrong about whether a particular work of art is good or not. If the quality of the art is dependent on the critic's emotions or the audience's emotions, then criticism cannot be compared, since the quality of art is based on something outside of it that can be dependent on cultural context or other external factors. If one critic went to a play on one night and the audience laughed heartily, but another critic went to the same play on another night and the audience didn't laugh at all, there's no objective answer to the question of whether the play is funny or not if we are to judge the quality of that play based on the audience's reaction. Similarly, if two critics have different emotional reactions to a particular piece, one might say the piece was great, the other might say, no, it was horrible. The problem is, we can't have an objective truth of which of those critics is right if their emotional reaction to the performance is a valid means for them to judge it. However, if we take that out of the equation and we locate the truth of the quality of the art within the piece itself instead of within the reaction of the audience or the reaction of the critic, we can capture something more objective and inherent to the art instead of subjective to a particular critic or audience. We can say, yes, that critic was correct to say that this was a good piece of art, and this other critic was wrong. Whereas when we're talking about those individual critics' emotional reactions to the piece, then we can't objectively say that one is right and one is wrong because they are giving a description of their own emotional reactions. Now, inherent in this argument seems to be the seeds of its own downfall. If no one laughs at a joke, no matter how well constructed it is not funny. In fact, a critic going around and telling people, no, you should have laughed at that joke, it was funny, it was perfectly constructed, is inherently in itself problematic. A joke is like a frog. As soon as you dissect it, it's already dead. If no one feels sadness during a movie, it's not sad, no matter how much it's a perfect exemplar of the form. At least one purpose of art is to make us feel things. Art is inherently something that requires an audience. It is a relational activity. If it doesn't achieve that goal, then it fails. If a saw fails to cut a piece of wood, it's not a good saw, no matter how well constructed it was. If audience after audience goes to a comic play and no one laughs, it's a bad play, regardless of the virtues of its inherent construction. The quality of art is inherently relational, and while this may make it challenging, if not impossible, to create universal objective criticism of art, that doesn't mean that it's false. Many pieces of art are inherently situated within a cultural context and require understanding of those other cultural features of the world for someone to get it, for someone to understand it. Certain audiences may understand those features, other audiences may not. The success of that art is dependent on the cultural context it's situated in and the people who understand those particular references. And here may be a way for us to find a middle ground. There may be a way to address both the concerns of objectivity and affectivity by indexing the quality of a performance to a particular audience. Comedy doesn't always translate between cultures, for example, nor does art. Something that's funny in one culture may not be funny in another culture. A dress that's beautiful in one country might be ugly in another. A poem that's a great haiku is likely a horrible sonnet. We cannot judge a particular work of art outside of a cultural paradigm, but we can judge it within that cultural paradigm. To use the language of postmodernism, we cannot judge something outside of a particular meta-narrative. If you have a piece of art that makes all sorts of references to Japanese culture, for example, and then you present that to an audience who has no context for Japanese culture, they probably will not enjoy that piece of art. That piece of art might be a bad piece of art for that audience, but for an audience that has a deep understanding of Japanese culture and the references that are being made, it might be a fantastic piece of art. The quality of the art is dependent on the audience it's presented to. That doesn't mean that art criticism suddenly becomes entirely subjective, but rather it becomes subjective to a particular context and to a particular audience. This prevents art criticism from being completely subjective, while still allowing for the importance of an audience's reaction to a piece of art. What do you think? Does the reaction of an audience matter when judging a piece of art? Or should artwork be judged on its inherent characteristics alone? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.